This is our last session of the day. Jason told me not to do long introductions, so I will just invite both of our speakers to come up. Jennifer Chan is the Vice President, Policy and External Affairs of Merck Canada. Welcome, Jennifer. And our second presenter is Andrea Palmer, CEO and founder of Away Labs. So thanks, Andrea. So they have a presentation. Both Jennifer and Andrea were part of the Health and Biosciences Economic Strategy Table, and we're really fortunate to have them here today to share what came out of that important project. So thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Susan. And I think, Jason, this is the part where we need to bring it home, right? And so, all right. So I hope that this closing session is really going to tie together all the themes, everything that we've talked about today, and really essentially perhaps serve as the opportunity, the springboard, the framework, whatever you want to call it, for our sector, for our health and biosciences sector. So without further ado, Andrea and I had the privilege of working together along with a number of other health system leaders in terms of this Health and Biosciences Economic Strategy Table. You'll hear the acronym HBEST a lot, so I might kind of use that acronym if you're wondering what that is all about. So basically we know that Canada's economic growth has outperformed the OECD average. But really what we're hearing today as a burning platform is that the projections are really showing that this is unlikely to continue and with negative impacts on the standard of living of Canadians. So actually in Budget 2017, the federal government announced that it would create economic strategy tables in 6 key sectors. One of them is the health and biosciences sector. These are industry-led groups that were really tasked with setting ambitious sectoral growth targets and actionable plans to achieve them. So basically this kicked off in the fall of 2017 through to spring of this year, so one-year journey of industry-led tables bringing together approximately 90 leaders, very diverse backgrounds. We had, multinationals, startups, entrepreneurs. We had federal, provincial, and again, in every sectoral table, there was the multi-ministry government approach. A very unique table. Across all the sectors, these tables met about 34 times, and really the work that was tasked to the tables was to really do an analysis of the current landscape and outline areas of competitive advantage, set lofty, ambitious growth goals, and very importantly, however, is work backwards and figure out and identify the barriers and obstacles that would need to be overcome or addressed in order to achieve these ambitious growth targets, and then really develop concrete sectoral plans of things that are going to be done and a roadmap essentially to be able to deliver on these actionable goals, and then also develop performance metrics and indicators to track and measure results. So at long last, this fall, September 2018, all the 6 sectoral tables have essentially publicly presented their final reports and recommendations. And there are about 32 overall recommendations across all of the sectoral reports. But if we focus in on, interestingly, in terms of the long-term vision for Canada's competitiveness, and across each of the sectoral tables, there were tables on advanced manufacturing, IT, health and biosciences. What was very interesting, just summarized very quickly on this slide in the middle column, is that across the 6 sectoral tables, there were essentially areas of convergence that each of the tables identified that would need to be done to really meet these growth targets. And they're really summarized into what we call 6 signature initiatives. And then we also did kind of an economic projection in terms of the impact, if these initiatives would be launched and met, that they would have tremendous and vast economic impacts by year 2030. And those are the metrics that you see on the very right hand of the slide. So in terms of these 6 signature initiatives, I will just talk very quickly about them and then just dive into the HBEST specific recommendations from the table. The first one is, and it was inspired by the Olympic Games, it's called Own the Podium. And basically, this really speaks to, and we talked about it earlier in some of the other panel sessions, it speaks to the opportunity to scale up our highest potential mid-sized companies to grow anchor firms by providing focused support in areas of risk capital, advisory services, and opportunities of growth toward the leading 25 high-impact SMEs in each of the 6 priority tables. Second signature initiative really deals with, and we heard a lot about this, and again, being a policy forum, this is where all of us get really, really excited, is the opportunity to build a world-class agile regulatory system in Canada that supports innovation and competitiveness at the same time while protecting and ensuring the health and safety of our Canadians. We'll do that through promotion of harmonization of regulations across jurisdictions. We heard a lot about that in the earlier panels. Use of pilots and sandbox projects, concrete examples, and we heard about that at the panel too as well, and dedicated mechanisms to assess regulatory competitiveness and innovation. And what was very interesting in a survey that was launched with many executives of large companies across the various sectors is that all of the sectoral tables and CEOs identified regulation as a top impediment to investment. So clearly, lots of opportunity for us to work on this through the HBEST. The third signature initiative really dealt with skills and really the opportunity to look at sector-led consortia for a roadmap to develop in-demand and future skills through curriculum co-development with educational institutions, expansion of work-integrated learning, and reskilling for mid-career workers, and an opportunity for joint sector government push to win the global war for talent by being able to retain homegrown talent here and attracting foreign talent. Fourth area really speaks to technology and really the opportunity to adopt technology, to establish a network of technology adoption centers and implement a digital assessment and adoption tool. All of this will support a lot of the ambitions that we talked about here today about being able to establish a value-based procurement network, moving to a value-based healthcare system. Fifth initiative really deals with having infrastructure investments in both digital and traditional to develop a national data strategy. Okay, sorry about that. And last but not least, and we heard a lot about it, is Canada's competitiveness brand. We need a globally recognized brand to recognize all of the amazing innovation that's happening here in Canada, to be able to promote our culture of innovation, to inspire and celebrate the better brand that's coming from all of this work here that we're doing here in Canada, to attract those foreign investments and attract the skilled workers. So without further ado, for the Health and Biosciences Economic Strategy table, summarized on the slide is the really ambitious vision that the table has put forward, and that is specifically by 2025, so I think we've got a 7-year runway, Canada will double the size of the health and biosciences sector and become a top 3 global hub. We'll do this by leveraging and advancing innovative technologies, attracting and retaining capital, skills, and talent, and ensuring a vibrant ecosystem that will unleash the full potential of the sector and lead to improved health outcomes. So I'm hoping that this vision is resonating with all of you, and I'm seeing Jason nodding, and I know Jason was very integral to the work at this table, but hopefully it resonates and kind of brings together all the themes of today's policy forum. Again, I do want to reiterate that this table was really unique, and we heard today a lot about that federal-provincial table, bringing government, multi-ministry, bringing private sector, bringing the investors, bringing the entrepreneurs, and folks like Huda and Andrea. And this really was that table that came together at the HBEST. I can tell you it was a thrill and an honor, frankly, to be sitting at the table with the entrepreneurs and kind of learning. But it was, there was tension. I must admit there was tension. Certainly when you think about health and innovation, and one of the principles that we set up at the table at the very start is that health and innovation are not mutually exclusive. And again, from both the federal side, we had very strong leadership from the Ministry of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, ISED, through Deputy Minister John Nubley, and very strong engagement from the Federal Ministry of Health through Deputy Minister Simon Kennedy. But I can tell you, the conversations, there were tensions, but again, I think really aligning that really, again, if we all work together, and one of the big principles was identifying some of those barriers. So I think I'll just put the elephant in the room on the table right now is certainly from the pricing reform that we heard a lot about today in terms of the biopharmaceutical sector. That was identified very early on as a barrier to this table from achieving these lofty visions. It was, hard conversations to be had, but it was certainly recognized and acknowledged that we need to find a way to address this. And that is actually one of the recommendations that comes out from the table, page 9 of the report for anyone who's looking for it. But those are the types of conversations and those tables that happened. So this slide basically represents over a year of work, but and a lot of consultations and many of you in this room inputting. But these are essentially the 5 actions that the HBEST table has proposed in order for Canada to meet the ambitious growth targets for our health and biosciences sector. They're summarized in 5 areas of focus, and so I will just quickly run through them, and then we'll just do a quick deep dive in terms of what the table recommendations are for each of these pillar areas or these 5 actions. So starting from left to right, the first one, and we heard it all today, but we need to really accelerate innovation adoption by employing value-based procurement within Canada's health systems. So again, while this was a federal table, there were lots of meetings from an FPT perspective, and certainly from a provincial perspective, this is what we're talking about, because at the end of the day, health is delivered provincially. But again, really looking at moving to this value-based procurement model, and perhaps thinking about establishing an actual procurement innovation agency to help catalyze this. Second action recommended is to create a modern agile regulatory system by adopting international best practices, and we're hearing that a lot of this work is starting, and eliminating duplication across jurisdictions and being able to decrease the review times and really make Canada competitive in terms of how fast these innovations can get to consumers and patients. Third area is to harness the potential of digital technology by creating a national digital health strategy and founded on an interoperable digital health platform. And we know that's a big challenge for Canada, but nonetheless, there's a lofty goal. Number 4, the action is to develop and attract world-class talent by equipping Canadians for highly skilled jobs, eliminating hiring barriers, and streamlining government skills programs. Last but not least, and we spoke a lot about really collectively driving the creation of anchor firms, and we'll do this by mobilizing late-stage capital, scaling up high-potential firms, and broadening research, development, and tax incentive credits. If we look at the first action, which really focuses on accelerating innovation adoption, basically the table is recommending the use of value-based procurement across Health Canada's health systems to increase innovation uptake and foster a more efficient healthcare system. And I think today we heard a lot about the need that in order for the best life-changing health innovations to gain adoption in our own healthcare system is we frankly need a systemic shift, I'll just put it that way, to a procurement approach that will move beyond just price, but really moving to value. And purchasers and payers, they need to be empowered to be able to consider, yes, price, but also alongside other critical factors. And we had a lot of discussion about value today. And that means improved patient outcomes, reduced demand for more expensive health services, and ultimately increasing quality of life and economic benefits for Canadians. We are also recommending that the federal government could take leadership in this area, and perhaps they can actually look at adopting a value-based procurement in their areas of responsibility. As we know, the federal government does have responsibility for a number of federal departments. And ultimately, we also recommend that a new or potentially existing health organization actually be given a joint health and economic mandate, bring those two together, and essentially be established as a health procurement innovation agency. The second area, or the second action area in regards to agile regulations, is really being able to create a modern agile regulatory system by being able to adopt international best practices, eliminating duplication in our system across jurisdictions, and ultimately accelerating uptake times. Now, we know that a regulatory system, and we heard a lot about it today, really needs to be modernized. And with the pace of science and the new technologies, I think there's a lot of work afoot by our federal government and Health Canada to modernize the regulations and ultimately really serve as not only the regulator for safety and efficacy, but also serving as a catalyst for new products and innovations. So at the table, we spent a lot of time, certainly with both ICED and the Ministry of Health, of defining that a high-performing regulatory system should be predictable, efficient, consistent, and transparent so as not to present barriers to business investment, foreign direct investment, innovation, and ultimately economic growth and improved patient outcomes. So the table is calling on the federal government to continue to accelerate and expand its efforts to increase regulatory agility and the modernization process that is underway. I think that is really great, but we need to really, I think, push Canada even further to surpass, in terms of regulatory outcomes, other leading jurisdictions such as Japan, the US, and the European Union. The table also recommends the creation of a regulatory council with the objective of seeking harmonization and reduced red tape, and we're seeing a lot of the initiatives that the Ontario government here is taking and leading that charge, and really reducing red tape across our wonderful federated system, federal, provincial, and territorial systems to enable and facilitate easier entry of innovative products into the Canadian market. So with that, I'm going to let Andrea take you through the other table recommendations for the other action areas.
Thank you, Jennifer. So while we were meeting with this table, we were reminded numerous times that our job was not to change or fix the Canadian healthcare delivery system. We were an economic strategy table, so our goal was to come up with a way to improve or grow the health and bioscience economic sector. But this is the closest that we came to actually interacting with the health delivery system, and that is harnessing digital technology to really drive those health outcomes by creating a national digital health strategy featuring an interoperable digital health platform. And this national strategy, we said, was needed in order to guide federal investments in digital health to unify the provincial and territorial partners among the common goal of delivering and leveraging digital technology to improve care and advance economic growth. And we propose a strategy that will provide a framework for privacy and data security, data governance and data sharing, and increase the information available to patients so they can make decisions and really take part in their own healthcare. So this was a big, lofty goal, and the key to success for this plan is really to implement a pilot of a fully interoperable digital health system platform across 2 or more jurisdictions to demonstrate what success looks like before rolling it out nationally. So to become a global leader in health digitization, we recommend that the federal government work with the provinces and territories to develop and implement a comprehensive digital health strategy. Consistent with this strategy, we recommend that the pilot project be launched regionally across 2 or more jurisdictions of this interoperable digital health platform. And we recommend that the federal government work with the provinces and territories to build a world-leading digital infrastructure to support digital health strategy and enable data-driven advances in healthcare. And part of this, we wanted to make very clear that the access to high-speed internet across the country is so critical as to not create a digital divide and have that be a barrier to access healthcare. Our 4th recommendation is on skills and talent, and we recommend that the federal government develop and attract world-class talent by equipping Canadians for highly skilled jobs, eliminating hiring barriers, and streamlining the government skills programs. So the skills and talent, as we know, are vital to the sector's growth, but there are serious shortages across all areas of health and bioscience and in the life science. So we need new skills, we need them quickly, in order to advance our sector. And this is everywhere from young graduates just coming out of university to seasoned executives and really having that ability to take SMEs to become globally competitive anchor firms, which is what we'll talk about on the next slide. So we recommend that the Government of Canada, the health bioscience sector, academia, the provinces, and the territorial governments all work together to establish an empowered and accountable hub to drive the necessary changes to the Skills and Talent Program and to equip Canadians for highly skilled jobs in the sector. We recommend that the creation of the digital repository of those skilled workers so they can be hired faster. We recommend the reduction of barriers to hiring highly skilled foreign talent in the sector and enhancements to the system to recognize foreign credentials, which is especially important, again, as we're building out from our SMEs, what we're good and competitive at right now, to the highly competitive global anchor firms. And we recommend streamlining the federally funded programs for skills development and training through a single body to manage outcomes and reduce the duplication and overlap. And finally, our recommendation, this task force actually started out as access to capital. How do we increase access to capital within the health and bioscience sector? And it transformed into the creation of anchor firms, because if we create a homegrown, globally competitive anchor firm here in Canada, the access to capital and the skills and talent and everything will want to come with it. So while we talked a lot about the access to early stage capital in the panel earlier, this is really a focus on access to that late stage capital, because the early stage capital, those conversations are happening right now, but there isn't as many initiatives, or there aren't as many initiatives around the late stage capital to help develop that anchor firm and make sure that as a SME is becoming big enough that they can stay in Canada and keep their roots here as opposed to being acquired by a foreign competitor. So Canada's innovative life science industry has the essential components, we know, to compete globally, and we have a successful track record of fostering startup health and bioscience firms. Yet, in spite of this potential, we don't have a single health bioscience homegrown global anchor firm. So this is the main initiative to stem the tide of foreign acquisitions within the sector and allow Canadian life science companies to grow into that anchor firm. So we recommend the creation within the Wiki initiative that would support and invest in the creation and development of later stage venture capital and private equity funds that specifically focus on life science. We recommend the Government of Canada enhances existing support for firm scale-up by identifying high potential health and bioscience companies and keeping them based in Canada by giving them opportunities to grow into anchor firms for that sector. We recommend a review of the Canadian SR&ED credits, the tax incentives, in order to allow for SR&ED access for eligible Canadian-based companies, regardless of whether those companies are controlled by Canadian investors or traded in public or private markets. We recommend that the government work with security administrators to develop policies and mechanisms to reduce barriers and increase incentives for Canadian life science companies to dual list on the TSX and on foreign markets. And finally, recommend that we provide support for the in-licensing of domestic technologies by creating a fund that would provide matching investment for any Canadian firm willing to grant an in-license or further development for another Canadian invented discovery. So that sounds pretty easy, right? Just, a couple of recommendations to help grow Canada. But this process with the economic strategy tables has really been an unprecedented opportunity for industry leaders to come together and make recommendations to the government. And these recommendations were led by the industry leaders on the table, and the federal partners who were involved were really there as a sounding board and to provide guidance. And we volunteered our time to sit on the table because we really believe in this potential and the economic strategy tables as an initiative in order to grow Canada's economic sector. And we see that health and bioscience is really and can be a driver for the Canadian economy in the future. So moving forward, the government will be mapping the recommendations in the federal economic statement that was released yesterday, or last week. last week, recently. We've already seen some links to the recommendations from our table and from across the way. Some more funding committed to the Strategic Innovation Fund for more access to capital, and the government will continue to assess more opportunities and implementation. Thank you.
So thank you, Andrea and Jennifer. Thank you for that terrific presentation and all of your work on the committee around the strategy table. So I just thought I'd ask a question to get things started. When you look at the report, and many of your comments today really called on collaboration between federal and provincial governments. And you'll certainly know here in Ontario, like other provinces, there have been strategies, life sciences strategies developed. How do you think we can best see that happening, real collaboration between our federal and provincial governments?
So I'll take a stab at this, and Andrea, keep me honest. So certainly this was a big topic of conversation at this federal table, realizing, thank you. Realizing that we do need to be able to bring the provinces and territories and have these FPT discussions, because when we talk about moving to innovation-based, value-based procurement, agile regulations, it does involve the FPT discussions. Now, throughout this process, there were, I believe, about 8 meetings of the FPT to bring these ideas forwards. And certainly one of the recommendations moving forwards from this first phase of work is, I think there were many panelists who have mentioned it, not just another report, but actually moving to phase 2 of implementation. And certainly the recommendation that an FPT table be convened to be able to catalyze some of these recommendations and really take concrete pilot projects and sandboxes from an FPT perspective and move those forwards into the next phase of implementation of the report recommendations.
Terrific. Andrea?
Yeah, I think that covered a lot of it. The only thing I would add is also building off of the supercluster initiative and recognizing that, some provinces already have a lot of initiatives in some of the spaces, whether that's digital or regulatory. And so being able to choose where you do that initial pilot based on the unique features that the province can offer, and building off of best practices so we can have a comprehensive strategy for the whole country.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. So this is actually a 3-part question for each of you. When you look at the report, there are 5 action areas, many specific recommendations. When you think about all of those, my questions would be, which one do you think is most feasible? Which one do you think could be most impactful? And my third question would be, did they leave anything out? Was anything left out of this that you would have liked to have seen included?
Okay, all right. We're going to fight over who's going to start on this one. So I think in terms of, out of the 5 recommendations, what would be most impactful? Being a policy person, I always tend to think about how policies and regulations just underpin anything from being able to happen, and essentially will create the safe and efficacious superhighway for the innovations to move forwards and for these ambitious projects to realize. So I think in terms of the regulatory modernization and the need to create an agile regulatory system, and again, this does speak to the work that's being done federally, but then we also have to bring the provincial territorial pieces together as well and look at end-to-end agile regulatory system that ensures that health and innovation policies, while each having their own unique objectives, do point in the same direction and help to accelerate innovation adoption. So I think that would be probably my personal view in terms of most impactful and important. In terms of anything left out, I think again, and it speaks to the need to ensure that regulatory policies, health and innovation continue to be cohesive and balanced and aligned in the same direction. One of the commitments from the table is to ensure that we are addressing other reforms that we've decided not to address at this particular table in another, through a parallel process. And that would be my recommendation, to ensure that we continue to work with government to ensure that the other reforms also get addressed.
Great. Andrea?
I think for me, as a digital health entrepreneur, it's easy to be biased for the digital strategy being the most important, but I think that especially if we want to be seen as a top 3 leader where other countries go, or when they're thinking about a leader in health or in health as an economic driver, they look to Canada as that country to have that impact. I think having the data to back that up and being able to say that, you know, we're a data-driven health system, here's really the comprehensive strategy across the country that's helping drive that economic growth. So I would say that the digitization table, but that's also my world where I operate. So that has the potential for leading us to achieve a lot of these outcomes because it influences so many of the other recommendations that we had, and it also provides the evidence for us to meet our objectives in the sector. And I would say in terms of what may have been left out is really the incentives for the provinces and the territories to implement these recommendations as well, because we talked about how, as this is a federal table, how can we convince the provinces that this is an important initiative to take on within their own world, and to do it in a comprehensive way and consistent across the country. So we have that federal strategy, and we left those incentives out of the report because they weren't comprehensive, and because we just didn't have a good recommendation on that front. So that's an important thing that the federal government continue to work for, is how do we incentivize these recommendations to be adopted across all provinces and territories.
Thank you. Any questions here? Jason? That's great.
So we know we're heading into a federal election next year. And I could see that working both ways with the HBES table. Is there a specific part of the table that you think will be incorporated within the government's platform that will become sort of an election piece that they would like to highlight or showcase and therefore drive forward? The other piece of it is, what happens if the election goes another way? And do we see this initiative having legs beyond the election?
Great question, Jason. And so because we're standing between you and the cocktail here, I'll be very, very brief. So there is a definite opportunity for the health and biosciences sector with the federal election coming up soon. And really, I think the opportunity for a lot of support for this strategy to move forwards. So again, I think voices of support, feedback on these recommendations, get them into your MPs, get them into ISED. And I think, Jason, not to kind of add another thing to your very lofty list, but I think, and one of the reasons why, ISED, the federal government said, you need to go and present the report recommendations to LSO at this policy forum. I think there's a tremendous opportunity for LSO, as the convener of the ecosystem here in this room, to think about what are those particular opportunities that tie into HBES that can actually be led, I think, to Andrea's point, by Ontario and perhaps LSO as a convener voice to bring those ideas forward. I think it'll be very chaotic if kind of everyone kind of starts throwing things towards the federal government for this HBES funding. But again, if ideas and thoughtful ideas could be convened, perhaps through an amazing voice like LSO, I think that would probably be a great, I think, thing to think about, and perhaps for the to-do list in terms of the next steps for HBEST. And I think with all of the work that you've done here in Ontario, Jason, with the LSO blueprint, the Ontario Life Sciences Working Group report, I think irregardless of what happens come October 2019 with the election, I think there's a great foundation in terms of the life sciences strategy here in Ontario that we need to keep pushing forwards irregardless. But certainly the HBEST will be a tremendous catalyst. And as Andrea indicated, many encouraging signs in the fall economic update last week. I think the HBEST table and the sectoral tables were referred to, I think, over 9 times in that mini economic update. So we're really hoping that this is going to be much more than just another one of those reports, but really it will come with funding, it will come with government, prioritization and visibility. So.
That's great.
Yeah, I think if I can add quickly, the benefit to this table is that it really brought together big players, big companies, small players. It brought together government and investors. And so because it wasn't a report that was written by the government, it was written by us as the industry, saying this is how we're going to grow, whether you help us or not. This is really what we need to take the training wheels off and be able to grow. I think that hopefully will have a benefit to have this carry legs if the government does change over, and especially if the government stays the same, we'll be able to have a launch pad to move forward.
Any other questions? Yes. Bettina.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much, and a shout out to women. I don't think that we're not 50% women involved, but lots of women, and it's nice to have this represented by women. So, I'm curious about a couple of things. The 21st century has been called the century of biology. And arguably, life sciences is all about biology and about the new exciting technologies that are enabled through biology, such as, bringing personalized medicine, repairing genetic diseases, et cetera, et cetera. And what strikes me about the recommendations is that they are all very process-oriented, and not that process is not important. They're all important areas. Not that biology does not produce a lot of data and digital is not important, but I wonder whether there was any discussions about the biology part of life sciences where, the NHS in the UK or the US, they have big initiatives in personalized medicine, et cetera. Is that something that came up? And related to that is that, people are hesitant when it comes to these new technologies. And therefore, communication and education is so important. And I did not see that in the recommendations either. Is that something that came up? Thank you.
Those are great points. I think on the biology side, it did come up, and especially on the digitization and the advanced technologies task force. We talked about CRISPR, we talked about a number of different things on that front, but as you said, it is a large part even about the marketing, about how you communicate that as a federal initiative of here's how we want the sector to grow. If we can't convince people to put their data in a digital way as a base point, convincing them that there are all these other things that they should do. We did talk a lot about genome sequencing and about personalized medicine in that way, but we saw that these recommendations were the base point and the launch pad for a lot of those other things to come together and to be able to be successful. There were lower hanging fruit that needed to be addressed that really built the foundation to build off of. So I agree that the marketing and the communication and that piece of how do we get Canadians on board, that this is their vision for their health system, is missing from the report. And if I can change my answer to what's missing, I would say that one. But they assured us that this was the recommendation to the government, and that within the initiatives within the government that would be built out as it needed to be.
Great.
And maybe just to add in terms of the conversations that were had in the sub-working groups that looked at the value-based procurement and the moving to the regulatory modernization, agile regulations, there were a lot of conversations and where, the government was looking for ideas in terms of, biology areas or therapeutic areas where Canada would excel and that could be considered for some of these sandbox or pilot projects. Certainly personalized medicines was a large theme of those conversations. Stem cell, oncology, antimicrobial resistance, so a lot of conversations about potential sandbox or pilot areas. And these are the kind of things that need to come forward in the recommendations for the HBEST implementation. So encourage those ideas to bubble up. And I think, again, for potentially LSO to be a vehicle to bring those forwards from a communications perspective.
Terrific. I think we're just at about time, are we, Jason? So thank you so much, panel.